What did the 10-year journey of writing this book look like?
Step one, be hospitalized. That is the first step. And when I was in there, I was not like, yeah, I'm totally going to write a book about this. I was like, I'm going to tell no one that this happened to me. I did not have a phone. I did not have a laptop. They take all of your stuff. Although I hear nowadays they take less of your stuff, which I'm happy for people.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Off the Shelf. If you love a story that gives you romance, but also makes you think a little bit deeper about life and healing, you are absolutely going to love today's guest. I am joined by Leanne Toshiko Simpson, the author of Never Been Better, a debut that is equal parts funny and heartfelt and unfiltered when it comes to mental health and relationships. Leanne, welcome to Off the Shelf.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Now, I read this on your website. I absolutely loved it. It says, you write joyful, messy, laugh-out-loud stories about living with mental illness and the moments of hope that get us out of bed every day. What are some of those moments? What are the parts of everyday life that you love and get you out of bed?
Yeah, I think sometimes people are very afraid of talking about mental illness or learning about mental illness because they don't want to feel, I think, that anxiety, that tension, that discomfort. And so I really try to look for the moments of joy, community, and laughter that make up a lot of my life with mental illness. So an example of this, I remember when I was in high school, I was on some pretty heavy medication. And so was my friend. And our parents would laugh because they would have this list of challenges they would do to wake us up in the morning. So my mom would have the ironing spray bottle and she would be spraying me in the face because I was comatose because of my very heavy medication. And then I remember my friend's dad was like, well, I just dumped a whole water glass on her head. The spray is too weak. And it's just, it's that kind of inside humor that you have living with mental health challenges. And if you can't laugh about it, it's so much harder. So I really try to look for those moments of connection, even in the isolation we experience.
Now, I want to talk about Never Been Better. It is a book that I loved. I read it late last year. But I want to talk about a bit more about your writing career and what you did leading up to writing and what you're still doing now, because I feel like you are doing a lot. You seem like a very busy woman.
My bio is chaos.
Yeah. But I also know you teach creative writing and literature at U of T. How did you find this passion? How did you know you wanted to do that?
Yeah, so the funny thing about me teaching at U of T is, living with bipolar disorder, I had a really hard time in my undergrad and I actually failed out of U of T. And so I always tell my students that when I teach now, because I think that my actual favorite romance category is second chance romance. And I feel like my own education is a bit of a second chance romance, where you can't let kind of the failures you've experienced, the hardships in your life, define the rest of your life. You have so many more chapters to write. And so I teach at U of T with a focus on diverse literature and disability arts. So I teach a lot of students who maybe wouldn't have always been listened to in previous iterations of Canadian literature. And it's such a joy to help the next generation of emerging writers tell their stories, because I know that while being a student at U of T, there were a bunch of mentors who helped me tell mine.
Mm-hmm. Was the mentors at U of T a reason why you maybe wanted to go back and teach there?
Yeah, totally. It really changed my whole life. I remember I was lucky enough to have a professor who's also open about living with mental illness, Daniel Scott Tisdale. And when I was deciding whether to drop out of school for a year, he was like, what is the race? He's like, it took me 9 years to finish my undergrad and I'm still here and I'm still changing things and so will you. And so it gave me that permission. I think when you're a young person, you're always worried about meeting these thresholds of success that have been set up for you, move out on your own by here, graduate by here, get your first job here, make this amount of money here. And the world is changing. A lot of those timelines are shifting. And so I think the most important thing I learned in undergrad was not how to meet any of those deadlines. In fact, I missed many of them, but how to give myself the gentleness to take rest when I needed it and to advocate for what I needed in difficult moments. And so that's what I try to teach my students. I don't care if they memorize the ending to Hamlet. I don't care if they read every single Canlit book that exists on the planet. What I want for them to take home is that being a storyteller also means being an advocate, and that it takes all different kinds of stories to make a beautiful world.
What do you love most about teaching? Because it seems like your students love you. I mean, I would come to your class just based on the last 30 seconds of what you have spoken about. But what do you love about teaching?
I love getting students to do weird assignments that make them think about what they want to do later in life. So like right now I'm teaching an assignment where students have to pick a place in Toronto after reading Denison Avenue, the really wonderful graphic novel about Kensington Market, Chinatown by Christina Wong and Daniel Innes, which was also on Canada Reads 2 years ago. And so they have to pick their own neighborhood or place that is very indicative of Toronto to them. And they have to kind of do a creative piece that explores that place and support it with like newspaper research and like scholarly framing. And a lot of them, you know, when you're living in Toronto as a university student, you're kind of going from library to study hall, like point A to B, maybe you go to a bar now and then, but I love making them slow down and notice the world. And I think that every writer has that gift of being able to immerse a reader in a certain moment. And so that's the kind of consciousness I'm trying to embed in them. And also it's really fun because I'm learning wild things about places. Like one of my students was talking about the Madison Avenue pub, which I used to go to when I was an undergrad 15 years ago. And I'm like, it's nice to know it's still alive and well and worth writing about.
What else like are you doing on a daily basis? Can you like, because you're
yes.
busy. Run us through like a day in your life.
Yes, a day in my life. So yes, often some grading, student emails. At U of T, aside from teaching, I also run a literary campaign called Trinity Reads, which hosts book events for folks all across campus, students, alumni, all of that. So this week we hosted Wabgishe Grace, who wrote Moon of the Crusted Snow, and we did a series of really interesting events. We did office hours in the ceremonial lodge at First Nations House. We had a really special lunch and learn with Zalika Reed-Benta, another Canadian author, in WAB. And then we did a big, like, kind of book fair, book talk in a very old and a little bit haunted hall. And so that's part of my week. And then usually when I go home, I put my son to bed. We like to go on an adventure from 3 to 5 every day. And I will fold greeting cards because I did chaotically start a mental health greeting card company with my neighbor. And we started it for fun because we're like, you know, there's so many cards for like happy birthday or happy new job. But what if you are sad? Where are the cards for being depressed? I want people to know that I am there for them when they are a blanket burrito. And so a lot of our cards, none of our cards say happy birthday. A lot of our cards say I'll be there for you. And that's important to me.
Wow.
So I often then fold like 100 greeting cards before bed.
Huh. How does the greeting card business work? Like, are you working on the designs? Are you working on just like the text phrases? Like, what is your role in all of it?
Yeah, so my friend Emily Gillis is a wonderful designer and illustrator, so she does the illustrations, but I do the words, and we kind of brainstorm together to what the card looks and feels like. And because I worked in mental health for such a long time, I feel like I can spot a lot of the gaps in our language that we have to describe mental illness or to reach out to people we care about. People are always afraid of saying the wrong thing, so they say nothing at all, and I think that's such a shame. And so we hope that these cards will help open up some of those conversations for future support and friendship, because mental illness is really isolating to live with at times. And so even just a card to let someone know that you're there for them when they're ready is like a huge thing that you can do.
Mm-hmm. And they are beautiful cards. I'll put one on screen, but Leanne brought Steph and I cards this morning before the pod, and they're beautiful. Is there a phrase or like text that you have put on a card that you feel really proud of or really impactful that like there is a gap in that?
Totally. One of my favorite cards is actually a grief card that we have that says, I wish I could carry this for you. Wow. And so often there's someone in our life who is going through an incredibly hard thing like a loss, or they're struggling with depression, or they're facing a really big transition in their life. And you want to take all that weight off their shoulders, but you can't. There is a limit to what we can do. But just being able to sit with them in that heaviness is, I think, a gift. And I think that's what books about mental health do as well. They ask you to sit in that feeling and not be afraid, but to be in solidarity instead.
Do you think hosting these events, doing the stationery, teaching feeds in to your writing, or do you compartmentalize them?
Yeah, I definitely think it makes me write slower. I am a little slow for someone who is rom-com adjacent, but I think that's okay. There's a term that disabled folks use called crip time, and that we all operate kind of outside the normative timelines because our body and minds don't always cooperate. And instead of fighting our bodies forever, which does not feel good, we instead embrace kind of the the synchronicity of our own bodies. And so I try to think about when people are like, oh, like, I loved your first book. When is your next one coming out? My first book is about an institutionalization I experienced in 2013, and it took about 10 years for that story to emerge the way that I needed it to heal. And while I don't think my next story will take 10 years, I actually hope that it will be way sooner than that. I believe that certain stories take a little bit of time to process and to rewrite in a creative way. And so I think that all of the community work I do makes sure that the stories I tell are still grounded in the everyday movements for people with mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've spoken about being diagnosed with bipolar disorder at a young age. How do you think that moment or the period in your life influenced the path you ended up taking creatively or professionally?
Yeah, so I was a really high achiever in high school. Like, I was like class president. I had won a scholarship to U of T. I was going to be a lawyer, if you can believe
Same.
that.
And I'm hosting a podcast.
We should make a club for everyone who thought they were going to be a lawyer because they had a lot of energy, but then didn't want to do it.
Oh, yeah. 100%. I'll be there.
I'll be there. We would have a club of very interesting people.
Yeah.
And so when I was diagnosed with mental illness, like a large part of living with bipolar disorder is the medication, but it's also the lifestyle changes. And I realized that like the kind of hours and schedule that a lawyer is required of a lawyer was not something that was ever going to be accessible to me in the way that my illness moved. And so I had to really like recenter myself and ask like, what is a way that I can make this world better, but I can also take care of my body? And being a university teacher is great because I lecture for like very constrained periods of time. And then I get to go home and recuperate and plan my lessons and work with students, not always like in person. And then writing is very much your own timeline, and making greeting cards, turns out, is also very asynchronous. And those kind of jobs have made life more possible for me as a disabled person. And so, yeah, I think that it all kind of plays a role in that.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you think that the world or even like books get wrong about bipolar disorder?
Oh my God, there's so much. The weather is so bipolar, kills me in my soul. There are other ways to describe it. The thing that I think about bipolar disorder is that people who live with this illness, we have these like movements, and we have mania and we have depression. And mania isn't full mania for everyone. People with bipolar 2 have hypomania, which is a lessened version that's harder to recognize but can be equally difficult to live with. I have full mania. So my husband can catch it real fast when he's like, this is not grounded in reality. And so I believe that by taking care of myself, giving myself time to recover, taking my medication, I'm able to cushion the highs and lows of that movement so that it's always there. I'm never not going to have mood swings, but they are a little bit more contained so that I'm able to hold down a job. Holding down a job was so hard for me when I was young and I didn't have the right medication. I actually worked at a mini putt course for 6 years and I loved it, but I could not hold down a single other job. I would burn out of everything that I did. And I used to see that as a failure of who I was. But it's actually, I think, a failure in the way that we expect people to work oftentimes. Like a 9 to 5 is not meant for so many people, but we're all asked to be able to adhere to that.
Yeah. And it's a very outdated system lately.
And it doesn't leave you room for creative pursuits and things that make the work feel meaningful. And so I did do a 9 to 5 for one singular year, but actually for the last 8 years, I have pieced together different teaching roles. I did contract comms work. I taught creative writing in psychiatric wards and museums, and all of those things built the kind of career that I have today. And I think that makes me like, I love that that's the kind of writer and teacher that I am because it's always grounded in the communities that I serve.
Mm-hmm. Now, if anyone is listening and they're struggling with mental illness and because you seem like you have found your passion for something, for so many different things. If someone is struggling to find their passion, what advice would you give them?
Yes, the first piece of advice that I have is throw everything at the wall. The thing about mental illness is that it took me 21 medications to find the right one. It took me a number of years. I struggled for a very, very long time. And there are still days now that I struggle. There's no finish line that you cross where everything is just okay. It's always like trying to prioritize your body, making good lifestyle choices when you can, letting the people around you know how you're doing. So keep trying it and not giving up. That is the biggest piece of advice I can impart. But the second piece of advice that I can give is that mental health care is also evolving. And one thing that I've been really lucky to do is be writer in residence for Fountain House in New York City. I actually went and lived in New York City in 2024 for a bit with my family, and I spent time at the world's largest mental health clubhouse, Fountain House. And the amazing thing about Fountain House is it was started by a group of psychiatric survivors who were able to lobby to get land in Hell's Kitchen and start like a clubhouse where people with mental illness weren't just being like fixed. I feel like a lot of care is facilitated like that.
Yeah.
But they were encouraged to like do art. Like they have housing resources there. They have employment resources there. They have a place to just be cared for and be in community. And I think there's so many of these houses that have been inspired around the world, including in Toronto. Progress Place is a mental health clubhouse here in the city. And so finding community and shared space, even when you're struggling by yourself, is such a huge thing that you can do. And it's less closed door, like talking about mental illnesses, than it was even when I was diagnosed in 2010. And I'm really excited about that movement.
I feel like you just reached into my brain because I'm so often talking about how some people don't want to be fixed.
Yeah.
They want to feel connection. They want to know that they're not the only one out there, which is why I'm always talking about romance, and I love mental health romance books, and I love anxiety representation that's done right, because for the readers, again, it's not telling them that there is something wrong with them, that there needs to be something that needs to be fixed. It's telling them that there is a character, fictional, yes, but there is someone out there in the world who is experiencing what they are experiencing.
Yes, and it's so revolutionary to be loved just as you are. And I think that's my favorite thing, like mental health romances, that is like my niche favorite reading pile. Like I have like shelves at my home library that are just mental health romances, because those are the books that have spoken to me so much over the years. Like when I was in the psych ward, I read Silver Linings Playbook because it was the only book I was allowed to read while in the hospital because all the other books were too sad. And that book is still being comped. Like I had to comp to that book because that book, there hasn't been a lot of mental health stories that have been recognized in the same way. And it's because it's a spectacular book, but also I think because we're still catching up in terms of what feels possible for mental health stories. But I have been so heartened to see like the explosion of mental health romances that I've read in the last couple of years, especially.
Yeah. Not to totally put you on the spot, but what are some of your favorite mental health romances out there?
I was hoping you were going to ask me that. One of my favorite ones is Isn't It Obvious by Rachel Vernia Katz. It is also a bipolar protagonist, and it's like a queer You've Got Mail retelling.
Okay.
It is spectacular, and all of her books are fantastic. I'm trying to think what else. Last Call at the Local, I thought was a great portrayal of ADHD. What else would I say? It's funny, now I'm thinking of so many, and now I'm like blanking on the
When
spot.
people ask me like what I'm reading, I'm like, what am I reading? But I get it. But those are two great recommendations.
Not a romance, but Emily Austin's book, I think, is her book.
Which one?
Okay.
Because I've read, what did I just read? Is This a Cry for Help?
Oh, you just read that? I love that book.
That came out this year?
Yes, that was this year.
Okay.
Yes, Emily is a good friend, and I love all of her books. Every time I'm depressed, I read Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, because I find it so just supportive as a read if you are living with like depression. I think it's just an amazing immersive read. But I did love the library angle of Is This a Cry for Help? I thought that was such a fun and such a needed intervention at a time where like diverse voices are not being supported in the same way they were in the industry even a couple of years ago. And so I really hope that books like that call attention to that shift and ask us to resist.
Yeah, and I think her writing, just at bottom line, is beautiful. Yes. I love to go, we're so influenced by Book Talk these days, which again, like I am a Book Talk creator, I do love it. But I miss walking into a bookstore and picking up a book that I have never seen before, a cover that I do not recognize, an author that I do not recognize. And I think it was 2-3 years ago, I think I had like just gone to therapy, and I was like, let me go to the bookstore, like I need a reward after doing that. And I had seen Emily Austin's Interesting Facts I Know About Space.
Yeah.
And it was the space, and it was the cover, and it was the synopsis where I was like, this is something that I normally wouldn't pick up, but I'm going to because it sounds so interesting. And it was. Like, it was just such a great read. She's such a great author.
And the humor, I think, humor is such an invitation for people to step into uncomfortable topics sometimes. So, like, even though, like, her books can deal with death or mental health challenges, I hope in the same way that mine does for people, it asks people to, like, step into those shoes and not be afraid, but to be interested and curious about what it's like to live with a lot of these anxieties. And I think they're anxieties that many people share.
100%. Yeah. Even I read a book, and it was talking about, like, something as simple as parking anxiety. When you're going to a new place and you can't, I didn't want to say simple was not the right word, but, like, it's not like I know people really experience anxiety, but parking is something that I'm like, if I'm going to a new place and I don't know where to park, I get very, very anxious.
That's why I did not drive here.
Yeah. No, I get it. And thankfully there's always street parking here, but I'm like, if there isn't street parking, what am I going to do? Like, it's something that it could be seen so minuscule to some other people, and yet I go through it every time I'm in my car.
And if you have many, like, this is how I feel, I have to kind of bubble wrap myself sometimes. So, because I have many things like that where I'm like, if this happens or this goes wrong, I will not be able to get to point B and do the thing that I am asked to do. And so I often, like, this is a disability kind of justice issue, like, transportation is a huge disability justice issue because you can run out of spoons, like the energy to do the task before you even get there if the transportation is not accessible or if the venue is not accessible. And so in teaching disability studies, I asked, like, how can we pre-identify some of these barriers that so many people face but no one feels comfortable talking about, or it's seen as an inconvenience or, like, extra work for organizers. And so I think it's a really beautiful thing to be open about our own vulnerabilities and barriers so that we can kind of map everyone's and try and create more inclusive spaces.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, I want to talk about your debut novel. This is what you're here to chat about. I absolutely loved it. For anyone listening or watching who has never heard about this book, can you give us a rundown of what it's about?
I was in a marketing meeting and I was like, it's basically my best friend's wedding if everybody had mental illness. And I believe that is its truest pitch. It's about three friends, Matt, Misa, and Dee, who meet in a psych ward. And a year later, Matt and Misa are getting married, and Dee is invited to the wedding, except she wants to go to ruin it. She feels that she is the one that should have ended up with Matt, and Misa isn't honest about her mental illness and therefore is the wrong person for him to be with. And so the action flips between flashbacks to their time in the psych ward and the swanky destination wedding that Misa is hosting in Turks and Caicos. And so it's kind of a fun contrast between what people imagine as, like, mental health spaces to what you can really be still struggling with those same problems and be in a completely different space in your life. And everyone's trying to say that they're so much better than they were and they're finally reached this pinnacle of wellness. But as we know, weddings are stressful and everyone is falling apart.
Yeah, very, very, very accurate. You mentioned this briefly before. What did the 10-year journey of writing this book look like?
Yes. Step one, be hospitalized. That is the first step. And when I was in there, I was not like, yeah, I'm totally going to write a book about this. I was like, I'm going to tell no one that this happened to me. I did not have a phone. I did not have a laptop. They take all of your stuff. Although I hear nowadays they take less of your stuff, which I'm happy for people. But they took all of my stuff, and I was quite young. I was 20. I was the youngest person in the ward, and I was a bit of a curiosity to everyone on the floor because I had to do homework while institutionalized because I was like, can't fail school, and then I did fail school.
Right.
But at the time, I was like, I have to turn this around or my life is a failure. And that is not a good way to go into recovery, and that is why I got worse after I left the hospital. And I have a background in literary nonfiction, actually, which people don't always expect reading my fun rom-com. But for years, I tried to write this, like, hard-hitting memoir that I felt was expected of me as a can-lit writer. And I could never finish because I would get too sad and traumatized. And I was working with Mona Awad, who wrote Bunny.
Yes.
She was my MFA mentor. And she was like, Leanne, I was in danger of failing the program because I had not written very much. And she was like, Leanne, is there anything that brings you joy? Do you like writing anything in particular? And I was like, well, when I was on disability leave from the time I tried to work 9 to 5, I started this, like, kind of silly like mental health rom-com about destination wedding. She was like, why don't you try and write that? And so it was a short story, only like 2,500 words, and it kept getting longer and longer until it became this entire novel that got at the emotional truth of what it felt like to be institutionalized and to go through recovery for so long, but without me having to actually relive every awful moment that I had ever had. And so fiction was very freeing in that way because it gave me the opportunity to write a happy ending for someone with mental illness in a world where we are often not guaranteed those at all.
What was your favorite part about, like, once you solidified, you were like, I'm going to write a mental health rom-com instead of a memoir? Like, what did you love about it?
It was so fun. I loved being able to lean into the humor of living with mental illness and all like the wild things like making jokes about shared medication, like the water bottle spritzing, like the wild jobs you take when you can't really function in a 9 to 5, so you have to you're walking dogs, as Dee is in the book, or working at a mini putt course for 6 years like I did. And a lot of those things are kind of looked down on in some ways, but they were such huge parts of my recovery. I would never be teaching at U of T if I hadn't learned how to show up at a mini putt course and turn the lights on every day for 6 years. That is a very hard thing to do when your whole life is full of ups and downs. And so low stakes practice, huge part of the way that I am now. And so it was just fun to be able to create characters who all lived with bipolar, but be able to not write like one singular truth of bipolar, but kind of like layers of nuance that each character had a different experience based on their own background, which I think is really true.
Was it difficult at any point to kind of, my opinion as the reader is it blends so seamlessly in there, but was it difficult to balance the like romance and the humor with the mental illness and the like somewhat darker moments in the book, or did it come easy to you?
I think I've always talked kind of like this, to be honest. I've had a bit of a dark humor about living with bipolar disorder, because when I was first diagnosed, I was like, my life is over. I'm never going to be able to do anything I want to do in my life. And I've wanted to be an author since I was like 10.
Wow, okay.
And a large part of me being an author is because I took this unusual path. Like, it definitely took me a lot longer than other people to publish a book. But I am very grateful that it took that amount of time, because I also think I needed kind of the emotional maturity to be able to talk about mental health and suicidal ideation and psychosis without that sense of fear or judgment. And so it took a long time for me to be able to do that. So I'm grateful for the long journey, and also for being an emerging writer for about 10 years. Like, I won an Emerging Writer Prize in 2016, and my book came out in 2024.
Whoa.
And then in 2025, I won the Kobo Emerging Writer Prize. So I just emerged for like 10 years straight. I'm like a very slow caterpillar.
Worth the wait, though. Incredible novel. I know you mentioned this briefly. I want to make sure I get it right, though. I have it here that your parents gave you Matthew Quick's The Silver Linings Playbook.
Yes, that's
okay.
right.
What about this novel spoke to you?
What I love about that book is the narrator at the beginning is so sure about how he's going to fix his life. He's like, I'm going to read this entire high school literary syllabus, and then my ex-wife will love me again. And he's like, the whole book is driven by this purpose, and the purpose is wrong. And I feel like that's a little bit of the setup of stories like My Best Friend's Wedding, where you're rooting for the protagonist, but the protagonist is a mess.
Right.
She is not making good decisions, and you love her anyway, and you see that vulnerability. And so I wanted to write a story where like mental illness wasn't like a plot twist or anything, but I think there is a sense of unreliable narration sometimes when you're living with mania and depression, where you lose your insight a little bit, and what you think is true isn't always the way that it is really happening. And so I love that, playing with that idea through the first person narration in Never Been Better.
Mm-hmm. Any of your personal experiences, did they make it into the book?
Oh, yes.
Can you give us, we're keeping it a bit non-spoilery, but can you share any of them with us?
There is a line where she talks about being manic and breaking up with someone and riding a tandem bicycle with them the next day, and I did fully do that.
Got it. Okay. Love it. Amazing. Did you feel any pressure when you were writing this book to portray mental health like correctly? Or did you just go off of your own experience?
Yeah, I did feel a lot of pressure because there's not a lot of books like this. Psych ward survivor rom-coms, we're a small bucket. That's why when it took so long for the book to come out, people are like, aren't you worried someone's going to do this first? And I was like, respectfully, no. Because there's just not, most psych ward survivors don't get a platform to do work like this. I always feel so grateful that I have been given this chance to advocate for our community. But I think that it's really important for stories like this to exist. But I also feel like when sometimes you can get comments be like, I don't live with bipolar this way, but it was like cool to see 3 depictions so that it wasn't just one way of seeing it. And that makes me really happy because I did want to show the spectrum of mental illness. And there are many experiences that aren't captured in this book. But one thing I really did want to talk about was like being Japanese Canadian and how talking about mental health is so different considering your cultural context.
Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, so I remember the first time I tried to host a mental health event for the Japanese Canadian community here in Toronto. We had a panel. Joy Kagawa was on the panel, who's a mentor of mine. I've been very lucky to get to work with her for a number of years. And we had a doctor from the community. And I remember the community newspaper came up and were like, well, we can't take pictures because no one will want to be seen here. And that's the truth, right? It's not just my community. So many Asian Canadian communities in particular, it can be seen as shameful to talk about something like mental illness, which is kind of wild because like when you think about the history of Japanese Canadians in Canada, we were uprooted and dispossessed by the government in the 1940s. My ancestors, like my grandparents, lived in camps and horse stables. And for us to be like, not have any mental health impacts from that intergenerationally doesn't really make sense when you think about it. We've all been moved away from the land that we would have grown up with. We're all disconnected. We don't have the language. And so I really wanted to talk about through Misa's character, who I believe is kind of like the secret heroine of the book. I wanted to show how Dee's expectations of her not being honest in the way that Dee's able to be honest. I mean, so many people can't afford to be honest because of their family ties, because of their cultural context, because of their professional obligations. And so I wanted to complexify that relationship between them a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you did it. I mean, it was eye-opening for me as a reader. What did the words "never been better" mean to you?
Oh, yes. I came up with this book title at 4 a.m. I sat bolt upright in bed and was just like, never been better. Because it was originally called Infinite Snails.
Oh, okay, wait, why was that the original title?
Because I have always thought about recovery being like this big endless spiral that has no end and you move at your own pace. And the marketing department at HarperCollins was like, actually, that's very hard to market as a rom-com. Not a super sexy, snails aren't super sexy, I get it.
I kind of like it, honestly. It's unique. I do love Never Been Better.
I love Never Been Better too because it's this idea, like it's what you say when you're like, oh, like how are you doing? And you lie through your teeth and you're like, I've never been better. But it's also a way of saying there is no better as a finish line. There's only the choice to keep showing up for yourself and the people around you every day. And that's sometimes the best we can do.
I also read somewhere that you didn't know how this book was going to end while you were writing it. At what point did you figure out the ending, and was there multiple ideas? Walk me through that.
Yeah, I know this is, especially in the romance genre, which is why I always say I'm like romance adjacent.
Yes.
I love 90s rom-coms. The book is very much inspired by 90s rom-coms. I think you can feel that. But it's also like an unusual book in the sense that I wasn't sure who was going to end up with anyone when I was writing. And this is also like a holdover from writing literary fiction where you're like, it's experimental, just see what happens. But like chaotic way to write a romance.
Right.
And so I did just sit down with the characters and I let them do their thing on the page and I made decisions as they got to know each other better. I did write the book chronologically. And it wasn't until I wrote kind of the pivotal scene where kind of stuff all comes together and there's kind of like a big turning point in the book, I didn't know what it was going to feel like because I do really feel like this is a romance in the sense that it's about caring for the relationships that are all around us, but also learning to love yourself. Like that is a huge part of the book that is important to me. And I wanted to leave myself open as a writer to what that love looked like for Dee, Matt, and Misa, because I knew that it would look different for all of them. And so I think I stayed true to that goal. Next time I know how the book ends, and I honestly, what a different writing experience.
What do you hope people take away from this book? I know we touch on a lot of different things, but if someone could take something home, what is it?
I hope they take a little bit of hope. Even sometimes people talk to me about the process of writing this book. Like 10 years ago, I never would have imagined myself sitting in this chair talking to you. I was almost unemployed, but like part-time employed at a mini putt course. I had barely scraped through school. I couldn't imagine what I was going to do to live on my own. And so much has changed because I really kept advocating for myself and used storytelling as a tool. So I hope that people see these characters and know that it's okay not to have everything figured out right now. Just keep trusting yourself and know that you will find the path you're meant to walk eventually. You just have to outweight your mental illness. Mental illness always wants to take time for you. It tells you you're not good enough to be around. And that's simply not true. We just have to outweight that part of our brain that's trying to trick us into cutting the story short.
Yeah, I don't think that could have been said better. We touched on this before we pressed record, but CBC Canada Reads, I actually, to set the scene a little bit, hold on. I don't think I've shared on Off the Shelf that I'm going on Canada Reads. I think if you follow me on Instagram, you would know, but long story short, here in Canada, we have a book debate called Canada Reads. It's hosted by the CBC, and basically 5 Canadians go on, they champion a book, and we debate between the 5 of us why our book is the book that all of Canada should read. And I chose It's Different This Time by Joss Richard, but your book also made the long list. Can you talk a little bit about that? When did you find out? What was your reaction?
So it's very funny because my job at U of T is running like U of T's Canada Reads.
Oh,
so
no
Trinity
way.
Reads is Canada Reads for my college. So I had already picked 5 shortlisted books. We held a live debate with JL Richardson from The Fold in January. So we were prepping for that when I found out my book was on the Canada Reads long list. And I was really like, this is hilarious. I've manifested this by running a fake ripoff campaign. And I was so honored. This year's list especially, 8 out of the 15 authors are Asian Canadian.
I saw. It's incredible.
Including Joss. And I think that is really amazing to see that kind of representation and diversity in the stories. Like there's a thriller, there's like a spy story, there's mine being a rom-com and Joss's being like a true romance, among some amazing other books, a memoir, and there's just a great diversity in Asian Canadian literature, and that made me really excited to be included in that list. And I also am really loving, like, I adored Joss's book. I was telling Joss I have bought 3 separate copies because I keep gifting it to people.
Oh
like
my
I read it and
gosh.
loved it so much that I've given my copy away 3 times. And I think it's just a book that will resonate with so many people who want to be loved but have to kind of get to a place where they are ready for it. And I think that's the beautiful thing about romance. It is about the relationship between these characters, but it's also about the relationship you develop with yourself and the trust in yourself that you will make the right decisions for you. And that's something that I loved about Joss's book a lot.
Yeah, I think everyone can connect to something in the book. I hope they do. That's what I'm going to try.
We're rooting for you.
Thank you. Yeah, no pressure. Second romance book hitting Canada Reads. So I'm like, okay, cool. No, I'm very excited. Last question before I let you go. What are you writing next?
I am writing a Mamma Mia inspired book. And
oh my goodness.
So people are always like, is that a rom-com? I'm like, that's a great question. Do you believe Mamma Mia is a rom-com?
Ooh.
Because it's kind of on the borderline like My Best Friend's Wedding.
Yeah, I don't know. I could see it both ways. I don't think I've ever thought of it as a rom-com. I more lean as like musical romance.
Right.
But yeah, I'd give it a rom-com label.
Yeah, it is. It's in the family of feel-good, nostalgic.
Feel-good, yes.
Love is like a central driving force, but it's also about familial love a lot. So that is the inspiration for my second book.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for coming on and chatting. This was an eye-opening conversation. I mean, I feel inspired, truthfully, by you as a whole and everything you just said.
And
So.
I'm inspired by you because you are doing so much to increase the visibility and representation and respect of the genre in this country. And I will be wholeheartedly rooting for you on Canada Reads.
Yeah, I hope. I am actually, the nerves haven't hit. The excitement that's the borderline emotion. I'm reading all of the books right now. I've got one more, and I'm excited. I'm happy for the representation it's already given by being on the list, regardless of whether or not I win. I mean, obviously I want to win. But yeah, I'm excited. So thank you for your support on that. And thank you for coming on and chatting.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you all for listening to Off the Shelf, and we will see you next Thursday.